All right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the Science of Identity Foundation,
Ah,
SIF for short.
okay.
They've been kind of popping up in the news lately, and we want to figure out why. We've
Okay.
got a whole stack of sources here, academic articles, Wikipedia, even some lively discussions from online forums.
Oh, wow. So we've got like a real mixed bag. It's
Yeah,
going to be interesting to
yeah,
see how those all come together.
yeah.
I'm really interested to see how SIF blends like elements of Eastern spirituality and Western counterculture,
Yeah.
all while incorporating like modern yoga practices.
Yeah, it's a very interesting mix, and that's what we're here to figure out.
Yeah.
So SIF was started back in the 1970s in Hawaii by Chris Butler,
Okay.
also known as Siddhaswarapananda Paramahamsa.
Whoa.
That name change alone is kind of intriguing.
Right.
Yeah,
That's a mouthful.
it is.
But that name, Siddhaswarapananda Paramahamsa, actually holds a lot of meaning within the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition.
Right.
Siddha refers to a perfected being, Swarupa, points to one's eternal form. Ananda means bliss, and Paramahamsa is a title for a renounced spiritual master.
Wow.
So by adopting this name, Butler seems to be aligning himself with a specific lineage and making a statement about his own spiritual attainment.
That's a much deeper explanation than just saying it's a blend of traditions.
Right.
So SIF actually emerged from the Hare Krishna movement,
Okay.
but split off after Butler had some disagreements with Khan.
Gotcha.
What were those all about?
Well, on the surface, it involved things like Butler deciding to marry and allowing his disciples to keep their hair,
Okay.
which went against Khan's stricter interpretations of traditional Vaishnava practices.
Ah.
But I think these
Yeah.
differences hint at deeper ideological divergences.
So it's more than just personal style choices.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it seems like SIF is this mix of Gaudiya Vaishnava theology and yoga teachings.
Mm-hmm.
But they also had a period of political activity, right?
Yes. Back in the 1970s, SEF members formed a political party called Independence for Godly Government.
Interesting.
They ran candidates for office, but didn't publicly disclose their SIF affiliation.
Oh, wow.
They even claimed to have no ties to any religious group.
Huh.
Yeah.
What do you think was behind that decision?
Well, it's tough to say for sure without, further information from SIF members themselves.
Sure.
Some might see it as a strategic move to avoid potential prejudice against a relatively unknown religious group,
Okay.
or to broaden their appeal to a wider electorate.
Yeah.
Others might question the transparency of this approach.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about Chris Butler himself for a moment.
Okay.
The sources paint a rather intriguing picture of him.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah, Butler's personal journey is fascinating.
Yeah.
He's the son of a communist and anti-war activist.
Wow.
So that placed him right in the heart of the 1960s counterculture movement.
Yeah.
You can see how that background might have led him to explore alternative spiritual paths.
For sure.
Yeah.
It seems like even after he joined the Hare Krishna movement and eventually became a guru, he remained somewhat of a maverick.
Yeah, even in his early teachings.
Yeah.
There was this leaning towards personal experience and a less rigid approach to traditional Vaishnava practices.
Uh-huh.
And this approach would naturally create friction with Khan, which tends towards a more structured and hierarchical system.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So where is Butler now?
Well,
What's he doing?
these days, Butler maintains a much lower profile
Okay.
and rarely makes public appearances.
Interesting.
Interestingly, his wife, Wailana, is a highly successful yoga teacher.
Wow.
She's even received the Padma Shri Award from the Indian government,
Wow.
a very prestigious recognition for her contributions to yoga.
That is a pretty stark contrast.
Yeah.
Speaking of contrasts, let's dive into some of the more controversial aspects of SIF.
Okay.
There have been some pretty serious allegations leveled against them.
That's right. Some former members have accused SIF of being a cult, describing it as controlling and manipulative. They allege that Butler was treated almost like a god, and questioning his teachings was highly discouraged.
Some sources even mention that Butler would publicly mock devotees,
Yeah, wow.
and that this was somehow justified as an expression of Krishna's mercy. What do you make of that?
Well, that raises important questions about the power dynamics within spiritual groups.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder where guidance crosses the line into potential abuse,
Right.
and how followers can discern authentic spiritual insight from manipulation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's not just former members who have criticisms.
Right.
SIF has been accused of promoting homophobic anti-Islam and anti-science views as well.
Yeah, these are serious accusations.
There.
And they underscore how spiritual teachings can sometimes be used to support harmful ideologies.
It's crucial to approach such teachings critically
Yeah,
and not simply accept them at face value.
absolutely.
Butler, of course, denies these allegations and has even threatened legal action against some media outlets reporting on these claims.
That's not an uncommon response from groups facing criticism.
No, it's not.
Trying to silence distinct voices can be a way of controlling the narrative and avoiding accountability.
Right.
It highlights the importance of investigative journalism and research that gives a platform to those who feel they've been harmed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little and try to get a feel for what it's actually like to be a part of SIF.
Okay.
What are some of their core beliefs and practices?
Well, SIF places a significant emphasis on having a direct experience of God's love,
Okay.
specifically Krishna's love.
Uh-huh.
They use the phrase lower than the straw on the street to describe the ideal state of humility before God.
We actually came across a source that analyzed Butler's language
Oh,
and found patterns that could potentially trigger the fear center in the brain. That seems a little concerning.
yeah. Language can be a powerful tool,
It can.
and it can be used to subtly shape people's emotions and behaviors.
Yeah.
It raises concerns about the potential for manipulation.
For sure. Seth also encourages cultivating a very close relationship with the guru,
Okay.
going so far as to use visualization and mental imagery to strengthen that bond.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Speaking of gurus and lineages,
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful to zoom out a bit and look at the broader context of the Gaudiya math tradition.
Okay.
Seems pretty complex.
It is.
It really is.
Yeah.
The Gaudiya math has a long and intricate history with various branches splitting off over time,
Okay.
sometimes with disagreements and rivalries between them.
Okay.
To understand Sif's place within this tradition, we need to go back to some of its key figures and understand how the movement developed.
Like Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who we mentioned earlier.
Right.
He's considered a pioneer in reviving Gaudiya Vaishnavism in the 19th century, right?
That's right. His son, Srila Bhakta Siddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, carried on his work
Okay.
and played a huge role in shaping the movement in the 20th century.
Uh-huh.
He actually founded the Gaudiya Math, which, as we've seen, is the umbrella organization that Sif eventually branched off from.
So we have this tension between preserving the core teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the 16th century saint who is central to the tradition,
Right.
and allowing individual gurus and their missions to develop their own approaches.
It's a dynamic you see in many religious movements.
It is.
Where do you draw the line between acceptable innovation
Right.
and staying true to the original teachings?
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
Then there's the Visva Vaisnava Raj Sabha,
Mm-hmm.
which was created to promote cooperation and unity between the different Gaudiya math branches.
The interesting attempt to build bridges and foster a sense of shared purpose.
Yeah.
But even with this effort, the Gaudiya math family remains a diverse movement
Yeah.
with a fair amount of internal disagreement and debate.
So zooming back in on Seth, what are the practical realities of life as a devotee?
Well, Sif devotees adhere to a strict moral code, including vegetarianism and abstaining from gambling, smoking, drinking drugs,
Okay.
and what they define as illicit sex. There is a strong emphasis on achieving purity and experiencing Krishna's love directly.
And of course, there's that emphasis on obedience to the guru and the Seth hierarchy,
Right.
which raises some red flags based on what we've learned about potential manipulation.
It's definitely something to be mindful of.
Yeah.
When unquestioning obedience is expected, it can create an environment where people are vulnerable to exploitation.
Yeah, for sure.
Approaching any spiritual group with a healthy level of discernment and critical thinking is important.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from SIF's origins and teachings to its more controversial aspects. It seems like there's a lot to unpack.
Definitely.
What stands out to you so far?
I think what we're seeing here is a microcosm of the broader search for meaning and connection in today's world. SIF reflects this trend of blending Eastern spirituality with Western counterculture,
Yeah.
all within the context of modern yoga practices.
It's clear that people are drawn to these ideas, but it also raises concerns about potential risks and the importance of being discerning in our spiritual journeys.
Yeah, it's a reminder that spiritual seeking can be a powerful force,
It can.
but it's important to engage with it thoughtfully and critically.
Okay, so that wraps up part 1 of our deep dive into SIF. But we've only just scratched the surface. Join us for part 2, where we'll delve even deeper into the complexities of this movement and examine its impact on the lives of its followers.
Sounds good. It's fascinating to compare and contrast SIF with some of the other branches of the Gaudiya math we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
Each one seems to have taken the tradition in its own unique direction.
It's like they all share the same roots, but have grown into entirely different trees.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Take the bizarre Gaudiya math, for example.
Right.
They've remained more focused on traditional scholarship and deity worship.
Then you have ISK on the Hare Krishnas, who have really gained a global presence. It's interesting how they've adapted their practices and message to connect with a wider audience.
And let's not forget about the Gaudiya Vedanta Samiti, which emphasizes a more intellectual and philosophical understanding of the teachings.
Right.
They've published a significant body of work and have a strong presence in academic circles.
So much diversity within one tradition.
I know, it's amazing.
It really highlights that there's no one-size-fits-all Gaudiya math experience.
Right.
There's a lot of internal variety and even tension at play.
That tension isn't necessarily a bad thing, though.
Yeah.
I think it reflects the ongoing challenge of balancing tradition and innovation,
Yeah.
finding ways to make ancient wisdom relevant in a contemporary setting.
It reminds me of that quote about holding two opposing ideas in mind at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
It's a sign of a sharp mind.
That's F. Scott Fitzgerald you're quoting.
It is.
And it certainly applies here.
It does.
Exploring the different branches of the Gaudiya math helps us understand the nuances and complexities of religious movements.
For sure. Okay, so we've established that the Gaudiya math is a pretty sprawling family tree.
It is.
But let's shift our focus back to SIF.
Okay.
And those specific concerns we touched on earlier, like the allegations of manipulation and harmful ideologies.
Right.
There's also the issue of potential exploitation, isn't there?
Absolutely. Former SIFT devotees have described working long hours for SIF-affiliated businesses,
Yes.
often receiving very little or no pay.
Wow.
They felt pressured to contribute their time and resources to the organization, even when it meant sacrificing their own well-being.
And we need to remember that SIF is registered as a 501c3 nonprofit organization in the U.S.
Right.
This means they have tax-exempt status, which raises questions about financial transparency and accountability.
It's crucial to look into how these organizations manage their resources and ensure they are being used ethically and in alignment with their stated mission.
Earlier, we mentioned SIF's emphasis on experiencing God's love.
Right.
How does that actually manifest in their practices?
Well, they often describe these intense feelings of devotion, of being completely overwhelmed by Krishna's love. However, some former members have said that these experiences were often fleeting and left them feeling emotionally drained and dependent on the group for validation.
It sounds like a kind of spiritual high that's ultimately unsustainable.
Exactly. And that dependence can be risky.
Yeah.
It might make people more susceptible to manipulation and less likely to question the group's authority.
We also touched on Butler's teachings about sexuality, particularly the accusations of homophobia. Some sources suggest that his views are even more extreme and problematic.
Oh, wow.
Like the claim that he linked bisexuality to pedophilia and bestiality.
Those are deeply harmful and unfounded associations.
They are.
It reflects a profound prejudice and misunderstanding of human sexuality.
It's really concerning that these sorts of teachings are being presented within a spiritual context.
It is.
It shows how religion can be distorted to justify bigotry and discrimination.
And those teachings have real-world consequences. They can contribute to a climate of fear and intolerance.
Right.
Making it harder for LGBTQ plus individuals, particularly those within religious communities, to feel safe and accepted.
Something that stood out to me in those forum discussions was how strongly SIF members defended Butler in the organization.
Oh, interesting.
It almost had a cult-like feeling to it.
That's a common characteristic of groups that exert a high level of control over their members.
Yeah.
Any form of dissent is often seen as a threat to the group's unity and the leader's authority.
So how can people protect themselves from getting caught up in these kinds of groups? Are there any warning signs to watch out for?
That's such a good question.
Yeah.
Here are a few red flags to be aware of.
Okay.
Be wary of groups that demand complete obedience and loyalty to the leader or the organization.
Okay.
Pay attention to how they respond to criticism. Do they encourage open dialogue or shut down dissent? Beware of leaders who claim to have exclusive access to the truth or present themselves as infallible. But be skeptical of groups that isolate members from family and friends or discourage contact with the outside world.
I think it also comes down to trusting your instincts.
Oh, absolutely.
If something feels off, don't ignore that feeling.
Yeah.
It's okay to walk away.
Absolutely. It's your life and your spiritual journey.
Right.
You have the right to choose your own path.
I think it's important to acknowledge that while we've been focusing on the controversies and allegations, there are people who have genuinely found meaning and value in Sif's teachings.
Yeah.
What are some of the positive aspects that attract people to this group?
Well, many people are drawn to their emphasis on love and compassion.
Okay.
They appreciate the sense of community and support they find within the group.
And Sif advocates for a healthy lifestyle with its focus on vegetarianism, yoga, and meditation.
Right.
These practices can have real benefits for both physical and mental well-being.
And some people find comfort in Sif's teachings on karma and reincarnation. These concepts offer a way to make sense of suffering and provide hope for the future.
It's a good reminder that people's experiences with religious groups are often complex and nuanced.
Absolutely.
What might be harmful for one person could be beneficial for another.
Exactly. It's crucial to avoid generalizations or judgments about entire groups based on the experiences of a few.
Right.
Each individual's journey is unique.
Okay, let's switch gears again and explore another interesting aspect of Sif's history.
Right.
Remember their involvement in politics with the Independence for Godly Government Party?
Yeah?
Well, it turns out there might be a connection to a more recent political figure.
Oh, really?
You're talking about Tulsi Gabbard.
Oh, wow.
The former U.S. representative and presidential candidate.
Okay.
Yes, Gabbard has been open about her Hindu faith and has even spoken about the influence of Chris Butler on her life.
Interesting.
Now, Gabbard has denied that Sif is a cult
Okay.
and has distanced herself from some of Butler's more controversial teachings. But the connection is there, and it has sparked some concern about potential influence.
It raises questions about the role of religion in politics.
It does.
How much influence should a spiritual leader have over a political figure?
Right.
And what are the implications for public policy?
Those are complicated questions with no easy answers.
They are.
But it's essential for voters to be aware of these connections and think critically about how they might impact a candidate's decisions.
Absolutely.
It's a good reminder that the personal and political are often intertwined.
They are.
Especially when it comes to matters of faith.
And it highlights the importance of transparency and accountability in both religious and political spheres.
So what do you think about all of this?
Yeah.
How do you feel about the intersection of religion and politics?
Yeah.
Does it make you more or less likely to support a candidate who is openly religious?
This is a good time to pause and reflect.
Yeah.
It's definitely a topic that deserves careful consideration and thoughtful discussion.
All right, we've journeyed through Sif's history, teachings, the controversies, and even touched on its potential connections to politics.
It's been quite a ride.
It has.
Yeah.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what are your final thoughts?
You know what stands out to me is how Sif embodies this yearning for meaning and connection that seems so prevalent in our modern world.
Yeah.
It reminds us that people crave something more, something beyond the everyday, and they often turn to spirituality to fulfill that need.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it?
It is.
This drive to connect with something bigger than ourselves can lead to incredible growth and fulfillment, but it can also leave people vulnerable to manipulation and exploitation, as we've seen with some of the allegations against Sif.
Yeah, it underscores the importance of approaching spirituality with a healthy balance of openness and critical thinking.
Right.
We should be open to exploring different paths and learning from various traditions.
Yeah,
we can't just check our brains at the door.
Right. We need to hold on to our sense of self, our own inner compass, and not be afraid to ask tough questions.
Absolutely.
Especially when a group demands absolute obedience or claims to have exclusive access to the truth.
Exactly. And in today's world where information is so readily available, we need to be even more discerning about what we consume.
Sure.
It's easy to get swept up in narratives that confirm our biases or appeal to our emotions rather than engaging with information critically.
So for our listener, what's the key takeaway from all of this? What do we hope they'll carry with them as they go about their day, their week, their lives?
I would say the key is to approach spirituality with a sense of both wonder and discernment.
Okay.
Be open to exploring different paths to learning and growing, but don't surrender your autonomy or critical thinking skills.
Right.
Trust your gut instincts, and if something feels off, don't be afraid to walk away.
Well said. And remember, this deep dive is just a starting point.
It is.
We've offered you a glimpse into the world of the Science of Identity Foundation, but the exploration doesn't have to end here. We encourage you to dig deeper research further and form your own conclusions.
Read diverse perspectives. Talk to people who've had firsthand experiences with SIF, and maybe even explore some of the other branches of the Gaudiya math that we discussed.
Right.
There's a whole world of spiritual thought out there waiting to be discovered.
And as you explore, ask yourself, how do SIF's teachings and practices resonate with your own values and beliefs?
Good question.
What do they tell us about the broader search for meaning and belonging in our modern world?
Yeah.
What are the potential risks and rewards of seeking spiritual guidance in today's complex landscape?
These are questions worth pondering,
They are.
and we'd love to hear your thoughts.
We would.
Share your insights, questions, and aha moments with us on our website or social media. This is a conversation that deserves to continue, and we're all in this together.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Science of Identity Foundation. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep exploring.